Our ancestors valued listening to live music. Our grandparents valued and owned vinyl records. Our parents owned cassette tapes. We owned compact discs. And our children are now streaming their music live. What do we value? Is it the ephemeral experience of listening to music, or is it the box that it was delivered in? And how might it change in the future for our grandchildren? As technology gives us the ability to uniquely identify something that we couldn't in the past, the virtual, the digital, the abstract, we as a society are moving towards access of experience and utility and away from ownership of its physical presence. So humans have traded and bartered physical objects that we have found of value through centuries, like cattle, livestock, grains. But through these times, there have been some key innovations that have changed the way assets have changed hands and markets have developed. So let's look at some of these key innovations, and to understand that, let's go back in history to Florence, the year 1427. As the documentary Ascent of Money explains, Florence, a city-state back then, was under a mountain of debt, 5 million florins, due to wars with other city-states. From whom could they have borrowed such a large sum of money? From themselves. Rather than paying direct taxes, citizens were now obliged or forced to lend money to their own government, and as a result, the interest they earned was not considered a crime by the church, as was the practice at the time. If a Florentine citizen would come in, pay their money, and they would get in return an entry in a ledger. These original debt instruments, essentially lines in a ledger, were the original bonds. If a Florentine wanted his money back in a hurry, he could do so by selling it to another citizen. Thus, a bond market was born. This is how Florence converted its citizens into its biggest investors. It was a revolutionary idea then that changed the world of assets forever. Now let's fast forward 200 years to Amsterdam. The year 1602. The Dutch are frantically exploring the East Indies in search for one of my favorite things to put in my mouth, spices. In the words of the author Brian Gardner, men were prepared to die in search of spices. No gift was more suitable, and to be well supplied was a mark of status. Wealth could be measured in spices. So maybe now you'll go home and respect your spices a bit more. At the instigation of the Dutch government, several rival companies got together to form the Dutch East India Company. Citizens were invited to invest, and in return, they would receive a share in company's future profits, thus creating an asset. 3 years later, when the company decided that if you wanted your money back, you could do so by selling it to another investor. Overnight, a market for the company's stocks was created at the Amsterdam Stock Exchange. The procedure for transferring the ownership of these shares was laid down. The buyer and the seller should go to the East India House, and where the bookkeeper would transfer the shares from the seller's account to the buyer's account in the capital book, lines in a ledger. Let's go back to music for a minute, shall we? Consider this. We could only capture something that technology allowed us to capture. So, since the days of the phonograph, we have owned music in a physical form. Some of us who may have had vinyl records back in the 90s and tried to sell them found out that our assets were no longer valuable. The music itself was valuable, but not the form it was delivered in. And then came MP3, a format to compress a sound sequence into a very small file to enable digital transmission and storage. It was like the experience of music had been liberated from the box that it came in. And if you were used to physical records or CDs or cassettes, you might have had a hard time overcoming this obstacle and getting into a digital leap. And then came Napster, You remember that? It opened the gateways through peer-to-peer file sharing. The next big inflection point was iPod, bringing us to iTunes, and then we're streaming it now with Apple Music, Spotify, Pandora, take your pick. From physical possession to digital access and rights. As the line between the physical and the virtual keeps blurring, here's a conundrum. Are we now attributing value to things that have no inherent value? Or, because of today's technology, we can identify what we find valuable? As you think about that, let's dig a little deeper. Remember the lines in the ledger from the 1400s? So, blockchain technology is today's version of that. Blockchain is a distributed ledger with encryption keeping its data safe. It allows us to package or create digital assets, and rights and access to those assets can be programmed. We can now securely trade digital things or even parts of things as digital assets. Now, these things could be virtual renditions of physical objects or other digital objects, or in fact, the combination of the two. This is called tokenization. So what might these tokenized assets look like? Let's take a few examples. Crypto kicks. Nike was just awarded a patent for something called the crypto kicks. The patent reads, as a consumer buys a genuine pair of shoes, a digital representation of the shoe may be generated, linked to the consumer, assigned a cryptographic token, and together, the cryptographic token and this digital shoe represent the crypto kick. When the shoes are sold, the ownership can be transferred by transferring the digital asset and/or the real shoe. These digital assets can be stored in something called the digital locker. Here's my favorite part. When you buy the shoe, the owner of the shoe can now intermingle or breed this digital shoe with its unique designs with other digital shoes to form a shoe offspring, which can then be made into a tangible new pair of shoes. Your shoes can have babies now. And if you don't find that valuable, you might want to talk to a sneakerhead. Crypto kitties. These are really adorable, if you could see them, collectible virtual cats that you can breed and sell. Think about that. This was the first instance of blockchain-based digital art on a peer-to-peer exchange. And before you think of buying one, you can meet Dragon. She was sold for $170,000. And as you wonder, who might buy these digital assets? Ask that question to over 250 million people who play Fortnite, the video game, globally. And that's just one video game. The video game virtual goods market is $50 billion and growing. The highest ever virtual goods sold was, take a guess, a virtual planet for a low price of $6 million. Even players with poor stats can garner respect from their peers if their avatar is dressed in the right skin, just like in real life. So, as we grow into this, I shared this with a friend of mine, and she said her 11-year-old plays Fortnite. If you really listen to the kid, what you'll find is this is real to them. This is nature. This is part of their landscape. This line between the virtual and the real that some of us think that we are crossing, the line doesn't quite exist for them. Okay, so you may be thinking, Roop, these are cool, but frivolous. Tell us about something real, something substantive. St. Regis Hotel in Aspen, Colorado. They held a token sale in 2018 and raised $18 million. They took a real-world asset, such as a hotel, broke it into multiple pieces as digital tokens. As an investor, you could buy a small chunk of the property, fractional ownership. As an investor, you can buy and sell this property multiple times over without the physical property ever changing hands. It makes the illiquid asset into a digital liquid asset. So think maybe one day we could own $10 worth of iconic hotels or iconic monuments like the Notre Dame in Paris or the Red Fort in New Delhi to tokenize and fund their restoration. And what do I get for my tokens, you ask? Tokenized holders, their rights are programmable. Ownership, dividends, distribution of money, being treated as royalty, whatever the token holder wants to offer you to make it valuable. Well, that was real, interesting, but can digital assets solve for the world's most pressing problems? Well, meet Plastic Bank. They wanted to solve the problem of 8 million tons of plastic entering our oceans every year. They developed a blockchain-based token reward system that monetizes plastic waste and tracks transactions at a micro level. As these transactions add up to credits, the waste collectors in the world's poorest countries can use these credits to earn valuable services like tuition or medical insurance or electricity, helping them transcend poverty. As blockchain enables a more secure, trustworthy, and efficient way to transfer value, we are now entering an era of decentralized finance. If trust was the currency of this new economy, then digitalized, tokenized assets are its new class of assets. They will lead us from the land of Internet of Information to the promised land of Internet of Value. And if you, like me, ever thought that my ancestors did not have access to these wealth-producing assets centuries ago, well, you should know that digital assets are now democratizing that access. Trading tokenized assets on global marketplaces is the future of commerce. The possibilities are endless and exciting. So let's just play with a few ideas, shall we? And as we do, you can think of yourself as an investor, a buyer, or a seller, or a hobbyist, a collector, or in fact, a creator, an issuer of these digital assets. Here's an idea. Sustainability token, a global asset marketplace of carbon credits to trade between companies and countries to solve for climate change. Here's another one, athletes token, tokenizing an athlete's performance contract as a first step to let you invest in an athlete directly as you would invest in a company on a stock exchange. NBA star Spencer Dinwiddie just did that this year. And yeah, bonds. Remember those things from the 1400s? The World Bank just issued tokenized bonds called I-bonds worth $118 million last year. A small start for a large securities market. This movement is inevitable. Back to the conundrum. So now, do you think, are we attributing value to things that have no inherent value? Or because of today's technology, we can identify what we find valuable? I will leave you to come to your own conclusions. But to me, as in beauty, value lies in the eyes of the beholder. We will trade digital art and real estate tokens. Our children will trade crypto kicks. Our grandchildren will trade the rights to their own holograms and their genetic data. And as you discover what you find valuable, the only question for you, ladies and gentlemen, what might you tokenize? Thank you.